Hey everyone, welcome back to Kubrick Corner with me, Sean Wilson. So, there have been a lot of really great, really diverse movies out recently, and instead of doing my usual thing where I'll do an individual video on an individual film, I thought I would roll two excellent films together in one video. The Florida Project and Paddington 2, two completely different projects, but both equally brilliant in very, very different ways, and which I think demonstrate that we're in a really, really good period for cinema at the moment. The fact that both of these came out on the same day just recently is really, really exciting. So start with the Florida Project first. This is the new film from Sean Baker, who in 2015 released Tangerine, which was a really punky, raw, street-level movie shot on an iPhone with an anamorphic adaptation. It was took as its basis this cast of like miscreants and oddballs, various street-level characters, but it was shot through real empathy and real affection, in spite of the fact that it was rude, it was raucous, it was quite gross out in places as well. Really brought Sean Baker to international attention. Now we have the Florida Project, which similarly is shot from the ground level. It's a working class movie. It's about a lot of people who, in many ways, are on the breadline, but it's done with an absolutely massive beating heart. And essentially this story is based around Monet, played by absolutely sensational newcomer Brooklyn Prince, who lives with her mother, played by Bria Vinate, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, in a motel on the outskirts of Disney World in Florida. That is, it's a transient motel, but a lot of people cohabit there. That a lot of people have sort of set up a permanent or semi-permanent basis because they've got nowhere else to go. The motel is managed by Willem Defoe, in one of those wonderful, occasional, sympathetic Willem Defoe performances that remind you that he can do more than just be creepy. Willem Defoe is brilliant in this. He is the manager who is basically has to oversee all of these various sort of ribald, troublemaking characters, including Monet. And he just about keeps it together, but he does so with a very, very sympathetic air about him. So she tears around the local area with her friends. She gets into various scrapes. She gets into trouble. And it's one of those movies that appears for the first half to be very freewheeling. There appears to be the framework of a plot, but no actual plot necessarily. It just carries you along on the sheer energy and warmth and vitality of its characters. And there is a degree of more visual formality than you got in this. This isn't shot with an iPhone anamorphic adapter. This has got there are lovely wide shots of the pastel pink exteriors of the motel that give it this real beautiful fairy tale-esque quality. And what Sean Baker is absolutely brilliant at doing is taking something that might otherwise outwardly not seem all that attractive and giving it a real cinematic air. He did this in Tangerine, he does it again here, and it's absolutely wonderful. The performances are magnificent, and it's really interesting because it appears to be a mixture of almost neo-realist drama with more seasoned professional performance. So Brooklyn Prince and Bria Vinate are not professional actors. Bria Vinate was actually found on Instagram by Sean Baker, but you wouldn't know it looking at the performance. But they are very raw performances, which then both rub up against and complement the more seasoned performance like Willem Defoe. So you've got this constant yin and yang between something that looks spontaneous yet which also has the structure of a scripted drama, and that latter point actually comes more to the forefront as we get further into the story. It's the implications of Monet's relationship with her mother that start to reveal potentially more tragic and troublesome dimensions, and it's almost a movie in which the impact of it creeps up on you, and almost where the story almost creeps up on you, because for the first half of it you are so bowled over by the energy and the humour of it that when it actually starts to reveal itself, it's all the more powerful. You do actually realise that this is a movie that has very, very important things to say in terms of how it's a social study, in terms of how it looks at people, as I said, living on the breadline, living on the fringes of society. As I said, the significance of the movie being set on the outskirts of Disney World is very, very important. There is this big tourist attraction that is sort of within view, but these characters cannot attain the will to get there. They're constantly on the outside looking in, and that's very, very important. But again, shot through the tremendous amount of empathy, real warmth. It's very, very heartbreaking when it needs to be. Yeah, an absolutely tremendous film. It's been talked about in Oscar terms, and I wouldn't be surprised if this got Oscar buzz. I think Sean Baker is a really fantastic director. and he elicits magnificent performances from everybody. And how wonderful to say that it was released on the same day, at least in the UK, as Paddington 2, which is a completely different film. This is the sequel to Paddington, which in 2014 arrived trailing a lot of negative buzz. If you cast your mind back to 2014, there was a lot of bad press about Paddington. The fact that Colin Firth had left vocal duties, he was then replaced by Ben Whishaw. There were all the posters and the memes that placed the Paddington's face on various horror movie posters, because when the Paddington poster first came out, people went, ooh, he had quite a dead-eyed, creepy look about him. There was absolutely no indication whatsoever that we were going to get one of the best live-action family films in recent years. It was absolutely brilliant. The Paul King, the director, absolutely nailed the essence of Michael Bond's original literary source, and it was just a really sweet but never sentimental, spiky but not too spiky family movie that had wonderful performances from the likes of Hugh Bonneville, Sally Hawkins and Nicole Kidman, and yet had a very, very progressive stance. It was very much without getting too soapboxy about it, it was a pro-immigration movie, and those subtexts have obviously taken on all the more meaning in Paddington 2, which has now been released pro-Brexit and in the midst of a far more turbulent political period than when the first movie came out. So Ben Whishaw is back as Paddington, who this time wants to buy a pop-up book from Mr. Gruber's, Jim Broadbent's antique shop. He wants to buy it for his Aunt Lucy, voiced by Imelda Staunton, who is still over in Peru. And the book is then stolen by a mysterious figure, although those who've seen the trailer will know who it is. And he is then sent to prison. He is framed for it, and he is sent to prison, and it falls to the Browns, again returning Hugh Bonneville and Sally Hawkins, and also Julie Walters as Mrs. Bird, all have to club together to get them back, them and the children. And whilst in prison, he is then makes friends with Knuckles McGinty, who is the cook, played by Brendan Gleeson. But crucially, the main person who I haven't mentioned yet is Hugh Grant as Phoenix Buchanan, who is the new antagonist, who is a preening, washed-up actor who has been reduced to doing dog food commercials in a very highfalutin, fruity, upper crust voice. That's actually one of the funniest jokes in the film. It's only a throwaway thing. You only get to see one of these adverts. It's one of the funniest things I've seen in a very long time. Hugh Grant is ruthlessly self-deprecating in this. He's always been an actor he's been very, very on the fence about the artistic the artistic worthiness of what it means to actually be an actor. He's always been very, very ambivalent about that, and he's not been backwards in coming forwards and saying it. So one sense is that he absolutely loves the ability to both skewer his own image and to also skewer the pompousness of actors in general. And he is very, very funny, and he brings the whole thing up. Not that it needed to be lifted up anyway, because even without Hugh Grant, this is an absolutely wonderful sequel. Again, I mentioned that message of inclusivity and the acceptance of strangers is now all the more potent and moving in the wake of various things that have been happening in the news since the first Paddington came out. The real reason why it works is because, as I mentioned with the first one, it understands the nature of the source material. It understands the very deadpan nature of what Michael Bond was writing about, the fact there is a Peruvian walking, talking bear, and there is a very deadpan way to which all the human characters just accept him. There's no sort of nudging in the ribs going, why is there a talking bear? There is just this acceptance. There is a wonderful amalgamation between the CGI Paddington and the human characters. Everything exists on the same plane, and there is a lot of very dry humour that's mined from that, as there was in the first one. Wonderful performances. Again, Ben Whishaw is perfect as Paddington. It's hard to imagine what Colin Firth would have done with this, but really Ben Whishaw has got that perfect lilting, innocent voice in it. Hugh Bonneville, Sally Hawkins, again, wonderful. Brendan Gleeson is brilliant. There's many set pieces that are just absolutely lovely, and how wonderful to have a family movie that doesn't resort to cheap sentiment. Although whenever the movie looks like it's going to get a bit treacly and a bit doe-eyed, it always pulls it back. Those moments only rear their head for a few seconds, and it always pulls it back, either with a very, very well-timed joke or with just a sense of emotional clarity that isn't sickly or saccharine. That's a real accomplishment. That I think Paul King and Simon Farnaby, who is the co-writer, they've done a fantastic job with it. And yeah, frankly, if they're going to make Paddington 3, bring it on. This is one of the best family movies, like the first one, that's been released in a very long time. So those are my verdicts on two very different but equally brilliant films. Let me know what you make of them. Hit me up here at Kubrick Corner on YouTube, or follow me on Twitter at Shawnee22. See you soon.